The sun had not yet crested the horizon over the Tiber, but Rome was already breathing. It was March 44 BC, a city of marble and mud, of whispers and steel. In the shadows of a quiet villa on the outskirts, 12 men stood in a silence so absolute it felt heavy. They didn't belong to this world. Their skin was tanned by different suns, their bodies honed by training programs that wouldn't exist for 2 millennia, and their eyes, hidden behind the dark glass of night vision goggles, saw the world in shades of phosphor green. They were Delta Force, and they had a single objective: ensure that Julius Caesar never reached the Senate on the Ides of March. The mission wasn't about changing history for the sake of it. It was a surgical extraction of a single thread from the tapestry of time. But as the team leader, a man known only as Miller, adjusted the suppressor on his MCX spear, he knew that the greatest enemy wasn't the Roman legion. It was the butterfly effect. Every step they took in their tactical boots, every breath of filtered air, was a gamble against the future. The plan was simple on paper: infiltrate Caesar's residence, the Domus Publica, in the dead of night, neutralize the guards with non-lethal efficiency, and eliminate the dictator. No grand battles, no cinematic showdowns. Just 12 ghosts in the night. But Rome was never simple. As they moved through the narrow, winding Subura district, the contrast was jarring. The elite operators moved with a rhythmic, calculated fluidity, leaping over open sewers and navigating around sleeping beggars. They were a vision of the future haunting the past. Above them, the stars were the same, but the world below was primal. The smell of wood smoke and livestock filled their lungs, a stark reminder that they were operating in a world where the fastest thing was a horse and the deadliest was a piece of sharpened iron. They reached the perimeter of the Domus. Roman guards, disciplined but relaxed in the heart of their own power, paced the torch-lit walkways. To them, the night was a shield. They had no concept of an enemy that could see in total darkness or hear a heartbeat from 20 yards away. Miller signaled. 2 operators peeled off, moving like smoke. There was no flash, only the faint hiss of a compressed air distracted, followed by the dull thud of a body hitting the dirt. The Romans weren't dead. Delta didn't want a massacre, but they were out of the fight. The team breached the inner courtyard. This was where the tension tightened like a bowstring. Caesar was not just a politician. He was a soldier, a man who had spent years in the mud of Gaul. He slept lightly. As the team moved through the peristyle, the rhythmic dripping of a water clock seemed to echo like a hammer against an anvil. Suddenly, the silence shattered. Not by a gunshot, but by a sound so mundane it was terrifying. The cry of a disturbed peacock in the gardens. In an instant, the atmosphere shifted. Torches flared in the upper windows. Shouts in Latin, sharp, guttural, and urgent, pierced the air. The element of surprise hadn't vanished, but it had frayed. Miller's voice crackled in the bone conduction headsets of his team. Go firm. Target is moving. They pushed into the private quarters. The doors were heavy oak, but they yielded to the pry bars of men who moved with the strength of modern machinery. They burst into the bedchamber, lasers dancing across the walls like tiny red spirits. And there he was. Julius Caesar did not cower. He stood by the window, a simple tunic draped over his frame, a gladius gripped in a hand that had conquered nations. He looked at the strange, masked figures before him, men clad in patterns he couldn't understand, carrying weapons that looked like black ribs of some metallic beast. He didn't recognize their armor, but he recognized the look in their eyes. He knew the look of executioners. Who sends you? Caesar's voice was steady, projecting the authority of a man who believed he was a god. The Senate, or the gods themselves? Miller didn't answer. To speak was to leave a trace. To hesitate was to fail. He raised his weapon. The red dot settled on the chest of the man who had defined the Western world. This was the moment. The trigger pull that would erase the Empire, the Dark Ages, and perhaps the very world Delta had come from. But as the finger tightened, a roar erupted from the hallway. The 10th Legion, Caesar's personal veterans, had arrived. The next 3 minutes were a blur of impossible violence. The Romans charged with shields locked, a wall of wood and bronze. Delta responded with the terrifying precision of the 21st century. Flashbangs detonated with ear-splitting cracks, turning the corridor into a nightmare of white light and thunder. To the Romans, it was as if Jupiter himself had descended to strike them blind. Don't kill unless you have to. Miller shouted over the comms, but the chaos was total. The narrow hallways negated the range advantage of the rifles. It became a frantic, brutal struggle of technology versus sheer, unrelenting grit. An operator was slammed against a wall by a Roman centurion, a man who didn't understand gunpowder but understood how to use his weight. The operator's night vision was smashed. He was forced to fight in the strobe light flicker of the torches, using his combat knife against a stabbing sword. The room was filling with smoke from the flashbangs and the dust of crumbling plaster. In the center of it all, Caesar watched, his face a mask of cold fascination. He saw his best men falling to invisible stings, heard the thunder that left no fire, and realized he was witnessing the end of his era. He didn't run. He stepped forward, raising his sword, offering a challenge to the leader of these demons. Miller looked at Caesar. He saw the brilliance, the ego, and the sheer historical weight of the man. If he killed him here, the conspirators like Brutus would never have their moment. The Republic might fall faster, or perhaps it would never fall at all. Chaos would reign. But orders were orders. The muzzle flashed. A single shot, suppressed and quiet, ended the life of Gaius Julius Caesar. The silence that followed was more deafening than the explosions. The Roman guards froze. Their god was dead, not by 23 stabs in a public forum, but by a single, invisible hole in a dark room. The terror that took hold of them was primal. They dropped their weapons and fell to their knees, convinced they were in the presence of vengeful deities. Extraction now, Miller commanded. The team moved to the roof, the heavy thrum of a localized temporal rift beginning to hum in the air the same way they had arrived. As they looked down one last time at the eternal city, they saw the first lights of dawn hitting the forum. Rome looked peaceful, unaware that its heart had just been cut out. Back in the vacuum of their own time, the debriefing room was cold. The monitors showed the world they had returned to. They looked for changes. Did the language they spoke shift? Did the buildings outside the window vanish? History is a heavy thing to move, and sometimes the ripples take centuries to reach the shore. They had killed the man, but they couldn't kill the idea. Caesar was gone before the Ides, but the vacuum he left was even more cavernous than the one his assassins had intended. Without the public spectacle of his death, without the et tu, Brute, and the funeral oration of Mark Antony, the civil war that followed was not a struggle for the soul of Rome. It was a dark, confusing scramble into a fragmented collapse. The team sat in the darkness of the locker room, the adrenaline fading into a hollow ache. They were the best soldiers in the world, capable of defying time itself, yet they felt small. They had used the pinnacle of human technology to strike down a man who fought with a piece of iron, and yet they felt like they were the ones who had lost. If you could travel back and remove one person to save the future, would you choose the surgical strike of a soldier or let the messy, poetic hand of history take its course? Was Caesar's destiny to die on the floor of the Senate? Or did those 12 men in the dark just prove that some legends are too big to be killed by a bullet? Let me know what you think in the comments. Would a modern squad really be able to handle the sheer psychological weight of changing the past? Or would the Romans' sheer numbers eventually overwhelm the tech? If you enjoyed this trip through a history that never was, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the what-ifs of our world. Until next time, keep questioning the story.